Hello, everyone. It's Ben live here. We're about to go live in about 15 minutes. And um, I guess hi in the chat segment in the side. All right, I'm just going to test out the volume real quick, see if everyone can hear me. So those of you that can hear me, Suzanne, please let me know in the text box, and we'll begin in about 5 to 6 minutes. Perfect. Sorry, they got this mic right in front of my face. It's just I realized I've learned a couple of things from the last few webinars I've done, and the sound quality is something that makes me cringe a little bit. So I invested a little bit into this mic setup, as well as a future project that I have coming that I can't wait to let you all know, because I think a lot of you will find this very, very interesting and entertaining. But we'll begin in about 3 minutes, and I'll let you guys know about this new project in the beginning of March, I guess, for a nutrition month kind of present. So really looking forward to that. But right now, just getting very, very excited to hear to talk about sports nutrition with everyone. I think it's a topic that's very, very misunderstood. There's a lot of opinions on, and hopefully I can shed some light. But of course, there's going to be limitations to what I can achieve within the span of an hour, of course. But I'll have something at the very, very end of this webinar to make sure that if you have any other answers, or any questions, I should say, that we can go ahead and answer those in the live chat for those of you participating live. For those of you watching via the recording right now, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this. Glad we can fit it in your schedule, and glad we can talk about sports nutrition. So I'm just going to pull up the animation right now to pull up the slides that I'm going to do. So just bear with me 1 second. The animation slides are not exactly fun, but we'll see what we can do here. All right. So I'm just going to verify real quick that this is working. Perfect. All right, we will begin in roughly 1 or 2 minutes. But before we really get into the whole presentation, I've gotten some recent feedback and some comments about the way I run my webinars, and I want to thank everyone that provided me with that feedback, specifically on the Dietitians of Canada DOC network, where I recently gave a webinar, and that's currently recorded, and you can watch that on my current best practices in the diabetes world. Of course, some of that feedback was I speak way too quickly, and I knew that. And I'm doing my best to try to reduce down the speed and enthusiasm, but still bring the same enthusiasm to the presentation, I should say, as well as the fact that the slides were overburdened and a little bit too much information. And of course, that's it's a difficult thing to walk that fine line for. In the world of these very, very complicated topics like keto, sports nutrition, and all that kind of stuff, largely because the topics are so big and there's so much information. And when you practice, you always think you have more time, but in reality, when it comes to the game day, you're kind of sweating, you're kind of doing your own thing, you're doing whatever. But anyways, it's been about a minute of me rambling, so I think we should begin in the interest of time. And of course, I want to thank you all for tuning in today. For those of you watching live, for those of you watching the replay, this is, of course, the Evolve Sport Nutrition Learning Center Introduction to Sports Nutrition. Like I was saying just seconds ago, that the topic of sports nutrition is very, very large, and it's one of those things that can't fully be covered. So what I'm hoping to do today is capture the overall view of what sports nutrition is, the very, very basics of it, and hopefully we can provide you some resources at the very, very end on, if you want, on learning more about this very, very interesting and growing topic. Now, I'm going to dive right into this and taking some of that feedback from the DOC webinar and shorten the section up. But of course, I do believe that in the world, especially of online webinars, it's very important to establish a connection with your audience. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ben, and I'm a sports dietitian living in Toronto. And I did my undergraduate degree at the Ryerson University, Nutrition and Food, before going on to the Sunnybrook Dietetic internship, graduating at that about 2018. So this is the 10th year anniversary of me being a dietitian, so I'm very, very excited for that. On top of that, I'm also I trained as a pastry chef and a chef, retired obviously to pursue dietetics, but still integrating that into dietetics in some way, shape, or form, and that's going to be very interesting to talk about in a little bit. I'm an athlete myself, world marathoner as well as triathlete, and hopefully one of these days I'll have enough time to train for the full Ironman race, but of course that's going to take a little bit of time. I wanted to explain to you a little bit of what Evolve Sport and Nutrition is, because I began my career in about long-term care, but quickly found out that wasn't the right environment for me, and had to do a little bit of a midlife crisis and reevaluation of what I wanted to do. Of course, I wanted to stay in the world of dietetics, but of course, I didn't want to move away from that too drastically, and wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And through personal reflection and some business coaching and ideas, I created ESN, which is a combination of culinary, my experiences in the culinary world as a trained chef and a pastry chef, dietetics, of course, as well as sports nutrition from the athlete and personal trainer side of things to create Evolve Sport and Nutrition. Today, Evolve Sport and Nutrition has grown into across Canada kind of campaign. We're looking at building it across international boundaries to see what we can do with international athletes. But we work with the most elite athletes in Canada right now, ranging from the Olympic athletes all the way down to the everyday common day athletes, and serving that population. We have multiple locations and partner clinics all throughout the GTA as well as Canada, and we're looking to build more very, very soon. And of course, we have built, you're listening to the webinar of the ESN Learning Center, which is now I've handed over the control of that to Catherine Rose Lovelace, because there's a lot of things in life that when you start doing, you have to recognize that sometimes the worst thing, or the thing getting in its way, is your own ego and your own desire to want to do everything. And I quickly realized that that's something I couldn't take on. So the quality and the drastic improvements in the ESN Learning Center are purely due to her. So I thank her so much for being on my team. Secondly, the most interesting thing that happened, I'm not going to talk too much about this, is my TV show. To the best of my knowledge, I believe I'm the first dietitian in Canada to create, produce, and host a television show, and that television show is broadcasted nationwide on Bell right now, and it's called Highway to Health. Additionally, it is also on the YouTube channel for Highway to Health, and I'll give you more information on how you can look at that. But it is a travel show looking at the way different people practice and interpret health. And if I believe I'm correct, my social media people, my PR people, are putting up the third episode right now as we speak. So hopefully we can check that out after the fact, but let's jump right into this. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of sports nutrition. I think this gets undersold a lot in the general population, in the professional communities, because a lot of it is seen as bro science. I'm going to prove to you that it's not, and a lot of the interesting concepts that we have nowadays actually comes from bro science, in the golden days of bodybuilding, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. We're going to talk about feeling before exercise, feeling during exercise, and feeling after exercise, and briefly talk about replacing sweat losses. Now, just to set expectations, here we are not talking about the Olympic athletes. We're not talking about the complexity of muscle metabolism and all that kind of stuff. We're talking about the everyday athlete, the athlete that those of you in private practice might be tuning in to get a little bit more confidence in the world of how to talk to someone about their workouts, how nutrition integrates into that, and all that kind of stuff, without diving too deeply into the biochemistry, which is, of course, fascinating, but it can go over a lot of people's heads. What this is not a presentation on is sports supplements. So we're going to talk very, very briefly on sports supplements, but we're not going to talk about that brand specifically, or what kind of sports supplements are best to use. The reason why is because this is nutrition. This is not this is not supplements. The majority of clients that actually come into my office, the very, very misinformed ones, spend a ton of money on supplements, but very, very little money on quality food. And of course, when we don't have quality food, then we're not really achieving anything, because the supplements are exactly meant to be that. They are supposed to supplement a diet that's incomplete, or try to find alternative ways to meet nutrition requirements without increasing that much more nutrition based on the goals. So, for example, a very common goal would be to build lean muscle mass and burn fat. And of course, that is possible. It is very, very difficult, but it is possible. But some of the ways that we do that is through supplementation, because if we increase those requirements through food, then the caloric load can be way too high, and it could offset the goals. The first thing I want to talk about today is the difference between sports nutrition and regular nutrition. They are very, very, very different philosophies altogether. Nutrition, I find, is about feeding health. Now, that's a very abstract and broad way of putting it, but that is what nutrition is for the most part. It's feeding all different types of health. It's feeding social health, emotional health, physical health. It's feeding all those different things. But for the most part, it is a fixed intake, so to speak. And the changes are based on the life cycle. So, of course, throughout childhood, throughout puberty, throughout young adulthood, and older adults, nutrition changes quite drastically, nutritional needs. There's tons and tons of research to actually support those changes. And of course, that's why there's so much information out there, and there's so much comfort and confidence with the way we practice nutrition in the general population. However, sports nutrition is a very different concept altogether. It is primarily, in my perspective, in my opinion, feeding physical activity and supporting the athlete. It is 100% custom tailored to sport, the activity type, the body type, the goals, and the athletic status, amongst a few of the variables that come into play of what affects sports nutrition. So, for example, when we look at sports nutrition, for the most part, we're not looking at weight as a measure anymore. We're looking at body composition. And to give you an idea of what I mean by that is that body composition addresses things very, very drastically in the body, hormonally, as well as from a nutritional requirement standpoint. The more muscle mass someone typically has, the more they are hormonally buffered against many, many things in the day-to-day activities. So, for example, a lot of people with a lot of lean muscle mass might have a day where they're not eating quite so well from a nutritional standpoint, and tend not to gain a lot of weight in return. The bloating, the immediate post-weight gain, and the general population, someone that might not have as much lean muscle mass, might notice a very, very big change associated with the exact same meal, even if the portions and the dosages were different. There's many reasons for that, but of course, the sports nutrition has a big, big role in that with the muscle mass. There are varied intakes depending on the type of sport, the activity, the type of person, and it's periodized. The concept of periodization is a concept found in coaching. So, for example, a very, very simple explanation for periodization is the nutritional requirements for an athlete are going to be very, very different depending on the goals and the seasons that they're in. For example, right now, to give you the most topical example, the Super Bowl happened about a week and a half ago, and now they're in their off-season training. So what athletes might look at during the off-season training is increasing lean muscle mass, increasing speed, increasing all those metrics, and to be a little bit more aggressive with the coaching and the training to do that. And then during the on-season, surprisingly, the nutrition changes and the training changes, and we have to match the nutrition to the training, because the goals are very, very different. The goals are probably mobility based, refining a few things, but we certainly don't want drastic changes in the on season, because that creates disastrous measures. Then the other thing is, finally, there is very limited and ungeneralizable research in the sports nutrition world. For those of you that have been curious and dived into the literature about sports nutrition, you'll find yourself in a headache oftentimes, because the majority of the research you'll find is in university age males, as well as elite athletes or retired athletes in their off seasons. The reason why this is because most sports nutrition research needs to have muscle biopsies, and most muscle biopsy research offers up to $1,000. So when we look at that, we look at the fact that this university age male population is very willing to have muscle biopsies taken for $1,000 to pay out for that research. And they're also very, very motivated by sport and physical activity. So there's a ton of volunteers to choose from. So what ends up happening is major populations like women, as well as older athletes, as well as younger athletes, we don't have a lot of research in. So sports nutrition ends up being a very, very gray zone, and the unknown is very, very scary because we can't be 100% confident in what we're doing. But of course, this is like any undeveloped area of nutrition. We look to our physiology knowledge as well as our background in kinesiology in order to look at critical thinking skills to be able to solve these problems and be able to best guide our athletes and our people. Sports and nutrition is extremely important. If we're looking to build the world's population's health by being more physically active, then we as nutrition professionals need to be able to know how to feed those individuals. I always say to them, to everyone that comes into my office and says, well, why do I need you? I've been eating perfectly well and I've been exercising perfectly well. I say to them, well, that might be the case now, but you wouldn't put regular fuel to run a performance car. Why would you run your body on junk? And when I use the word junk, I have to follow up and explain that not all food is junk, but of course that there's different levels of nutrition and food that can benefit the body. There's a lot of misinformation out there in the sense where not only in general nutrition, but specifically in the world of sports nutrition, and the misinformation is carried forward by a lot of poor food labeling regulations. Now, I can only speak to this in Canada, and I know I have viewers and attendees all over the world, so I can't speak to those regulations. But the supplement industry in Canada is largely self-regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And with food and drugs, they have a very strict philosophy. The philosophy is to be that it's not safe until you prove so. So there's a lot of research, double-blind studies, and all that kind of stuff. But in the supplement industry, it's very self-regulated. The philosophy is the exact opposite. It's safe until you prove otherwise. So I'll give you a good example, albeit it's an extreme example, but I'll give you a good example. These are the chemical signals or chemical structures for, and you're reading this right, amphetamine and ephedrine. You look at the similarities between the two. And ephedrine is commonly used in pre-workout supplements to help increase the ability for someone to work out, increase their drive and their push and all that kind of stuff that comes with a workout. And the amphetamine is, you guessed it, actually methamphetamine. When we look at these two products, we're like, well, how can anyone screw that up so badly? And in fact, this was screwed up so badly in the 1990s, where there was a popular pre-workout supplement being sold, promising to build lean muscle mass, burn fat, give you more energy during your workouts, give you more energy in general, and basically and just make you feel invincible. Ironically, these are the exact same things that methamphetamine does, and they kind of figured that out, so they started selling diluted versions of amphetamines. Now, that's a very, very scary thing, and I can't see everyone's face right now, but I imagine that it's quite shocked. But it's one of those things that is very, very concerning, because as nutrition professionals, we want to make sure that people are we're causing no harm, first and foremost, as medical professionals, but that we're confident in that the fact that our clients are going to be better off and healthier with our nutrition recommendations, not exposed to more risks. So the supplement industry is largely unregulated, and it's one of those the reasons why sports nutrition and the study of sports nutrition is so important. So we're not going to talk about specific supplements, but I thought it'd be beneficial to talk about some of the things that you should avoid, as well as your clients and anyone that comes with you for some questions. And I call these red flags, of course. These red flags are products that claim to work like prescription drugs. A lot of those might be, for example, there's some products out there that claim to work just as good as metformin, for example, for the diabetic population. Products advertised through mass emails, that can't be great. It can't be bad either, but of course those emails typically you're signing up to, not getting solicited by. Products marketed in a foreign country, and it was quite funny because I had a client one time, he spoke to me, he's like, I got this amazing pre-workout supplement, it's only sold in Germany, it's all this, all this, all this. And when I looked at the ingredient list, is because there was a banned substance in Canada. It wasn't amphetamine, but it was a banned substance. So it's different countries have different labeling regulations too. Products that promise weight loss, bodybuilding, or enhanced sexual performance. You'll find this a lot with the males that engage in sports nutrition questions specifically about supplements, because a lot of these supplements will claim to increase testosterone, and a part of that would be increased sex drive too. That promise products that promise weight loss, anything like that, it's usually a red flag. And products that claim to be legal alternatives to anabolic steroids, huge red flag. So those are the things that you should look for, teach your clients to look out for, and to avoid. Let's get into this thing. Of course, we're going to talk about feeling before exercise. This is one of the most important things because it has very, very big effects on how the body uses energy pathways. There are 3 energy pathways in the body, and they determine quite a lot in the body. So there's the aerobic energy metabolism, which happens at lower heart rates and resting. It's what we're currently doing right now, assuming that nobody's working out while listening to this webinar. The next energy pathway is the anaerobic energy pathway, and that's the energy pathway used at high intensity physical activity, what leaves you out of breath typically, and it uses a different fuel pathway and different energy pathway. And like I said, I will not dive into the biochemistry with this because it's just going to go above and beyond what I have to be able to talk about, and I'll rush through those slides, unfortunately. The final pathway is the phosphocreatine pathway. This is the pathway associated with explosive movements. So, for example, a 100-meter dash or CrossFit workouts or anything like that, and 1 rep max workouts, this is the energy pathway. If we don't feel properly before exercise, then the body actually prohibits or makes it more difficult for the body to actually use the energy pathways properly. So for example, if someone doesn't eat before a workout and it's a hard workout, the body will actually prevent them from using the anaerobic energy pathway. The response at that point is that it's going to metabolize amino acids from inactive tissue, move it to the liver, put it through a process called gluconeogenesis to create new sugars, fuel that workout. Now that's counterintuitive to what the workout is supposed to do, because the workouts are supposed to build lean muscle mass, not burn them apart. But it's one of these things that is why sports nutrition is so important, because if you don't eat properly before a workout, then you won't use the proper energy pathway. Let's talk about the pre-exercise feeling guidelines. There's about 4 functions to them: to prevent low blood sugars, to help settle the stomach, fuel muscles, and provide the peace of mind that you're going to have a good workout. And the last one, a lot of people say, is a lot of fluff, but it actually does make quite a bit of sense. If you're not sure whether or not you're going to have a good workout, if your mindset is off, then of course the workout itself is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's not going to be good and might be a bit of a waste of time, but it also increases the risk of injury. The prevention of hypoglycemia, there could be many reasons for this. If someone's not eating before a workout because they're trying to lose weight a little bit more effectively, then what we can see is a rebound hypoglycemic effect, because at the beginning of all workouts, the body will typically absorb all the carbohydrates and then re-release them once a steady heart rate is reached. It helps settle the stomach, and this is important because if you go into a workout on an empty stomach, then your body tends to create more stomach acid, and this does not settle the stomach very well. This feels very, very upset. It's a very not good feeling, I should say, during the workout. And feeling the muscles, obviously, like I said before, if you don't eat properly before a workout, then your body cannot use the proper energy pathway. The body will actually preserve the glycogen stores in the muscles that it's actively being used, and preferentially tear apart the lean muscle mass that's not using. There's many reasons why people don't feel properly, and I'm sure us dietitians have heard many excuses, but here are the most common ones that a lot of people need to have addressed with sports nutrition. One is that they're having an adverse reaction to food. So something they're eating before physical activity is not sitting well in their stomach, and they're eating way too much. There's not enough time to eat, and this is most often the one I hear the most, because there's just not enough time in general. I myself can attest to this with a TV show, running ESN, and of course trying to take care of my own physical activity, my own health. People don't do it a lot of the times because they want to lose weight, and they want to lose, but I always say that we want them to lose the right weight. We don't want them to lose muscle, we want them to lose fat. We want to change the body composition, not specifically weight loss. So we're changing their framework around what weight loss actually is to preserve lean muscle mass and burn fat. And of course, finally, not knowing what to eat. Pre-exercise fueling guidelines, something very, very simple, would be, of course, to focus on carbohydrates. Very, very plain, basic carbohydrates will do, because this is going to be the easiest for the body to tolerate. And it's the easiest to carry around. Snacks within an hour before exercise can prevent hypoglycemia. Now, everyone is going to be very, very different on this topic because of the fact that everyone has different digestion rates and different digestive times in association with the food. So what I typically do would start at the 45-minute mark and then ask the client whether or not it was better energy during the workout or worse energy. Now, that's a very subjective measure, but that's all we can do during this time before if someone is that unaware of where they are in their physical activity. Some people might not even be able to rate how intense the physical activity is. So creating that mindfulness, that awareness is part of the game here. Relying on familiar foods. One time I had a cross-country team try sushi for the first time before a meet. And guess what? They all threw up. It was fantastic that they're willing to try new foods. However, before physical activity is definitely not the way to do it because we don't know how that food is going to sit in the stomach. We don't know how the body's going to respond, if there's going to be some sort of intolerance or a digestive issue. It's just best to rely on familiar foods before physical activity. We want to limit high-fat sources of food. Now, this is really challenging for a lot of people right now following the keto craze and all that kind of stuff because, of course, fat is what they're eating the majority of for their diet. So they're finding their workouts suffering for a lot of different reasons, and we can't go into that. But typically, we want to limit high-fat sources of food. The reason why is because high-fat sources of food will slow down digestion. According to regular nutrition, this is a good thing. We want things to break down slowly. We want the digestive system to be engaged as long as possible. But from the sports and nutrition perspective, we want things to move pretty quickly and fuel our muscles really, really quickly. So in that light, we want to be aware of low glycemic index foods. So the foods that are typically a little bit healthier that we want, like sweet potato versus white potato, regular baked potatoes, may be disastrous in the sports and nutrition world because the glycemic index, the fiber content associated with the glycemic index foods will elicit more of a digestive response, pulling a lot more of the blood to the stomach during physical activity time instead of the blood being in the muscles where the blood should be. We need to allow adequate time to digest. And of course, this is a very, very difficult thing to establish because a lot of people have different rates of digestion and different, depending on many different factors. So, like I said before, start at the 45-minute mark and move up or down depending on how someone feels during that physical activity. And we want them to be able to hydrate. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Proper fueling depends on the length and the intensity of the workout. Now, we have short exercise length, which is typically anything under an hour, which is the majority of what everyone is going to be addressing, the majority of the people that this webinar is supposed to cover. When we look at short exercise length, we look at both the intensity, high intensity and low intensity. Now, there are subjective ways of gauging this as well as physiological ways of doing this. High intensity would be gauged subjectively by the rate of perceived effort, anything above 7 out of 10. So if you ask someone how intense their workout is and they're saying, well, probably 9 out of 10, then it's a high intensity workout. From a heart rate perspective, we're looking at specific heart rate zones, but of course, this is we don't have time to go into that with this webinar. With low intensity physical activity, it's the requirements are a little bit different. Before exercise, we would look at, of course, moderate protein sources, moderate fat, and a lower carbohydrate source. And of course, this is feeling those energy pathways a little bit more efficiently that they would be using because during low intensity physical activity, they would typically use the aerobic energy metabolism system. During high intensity physical activity, they would be using the anaerobic system. So we'd want higher carbohydrates, the lower glycemic variety, so that they're digesting a little bit better, a little bit of protein, and low fat. So we have a couple of different recommendations there. Now, we don't have enough time to talk about the long length exercise, but that's anything typically above an hour. Now, the nutrition and the physiology and the exercise physiology gets much, much more intense after that. But briefly, what you can say is for anyone above an hour, for high intensity, you'd like higher carbohydrates, moderate protein, moderate fat. So something very, very similar to the short exercise length, but moderate fat being the key change there, in the sense where moderate fat will allow the body to break down the carbohydrates a little bit slower during the physical activity. And it's general that the long exercise length, high intensity, is there's points in time where the physical activity is higher in intensity, not the whole physical activity in general. So that's something to take in mind too. In terms of low intensity physical activity, we're looking at something a little bit higher in protein, higher in fat, and moderate carbohydrates. The reason why is because during low intensity physical activity, like 2 to 3 hour bike ride that's very leisurely, we want the fuel to break down a little bit slower in the body. We want it to release while someone's exercising, and we don't want them to burn through all the glycogen stores right away. So from that point on, we're looking at something that breaks down a lot slower and has a little bit of carbohydrates that breaks down and releases during the physical activity. Fueling during the exercise is a little bit more tricky. And of course, this is typically required for exercise lasting more than 60 minutes, but occasionally you will find people that need to fuel within the 60-minute time frame. Everyone is individually based, and there's a lot of reasons for this. The goal here is to replace sugar, specifically carbohydrates, and fluids lost through exercise, because primarily glycogen and glucose, those sugars, are the primary energy fuel source in the body. It helps increase stamina, so your endurance athletes and runners and cardio people, it's definitely going to be a little bit more necessary for them. It maintains mental focus, because if you start depleting glycogen stores, your brain will not have the primary fuel source it needs to operate. So it won't have glycogen to operate, and it won't have glucose to operate. So you start to lose some mental focus. Now, this is very, very important depending on the type of sport and type of physical activity you have. For example, if a soccer athlete, a recreational one that's not really intense but plays a pickup league or something like that, has 90-minute games, then if they're complaining about mental exhaustion in the final quarter and they're not making good decisions, you might want to take a look at their carbohydrate intake during the game. We want typically carbohydrates aiming anywhere from 25 to 60 grams per hour. Now, this is quite a big range, and that's reflective of many different variables. For example, the experience of the exerciser, how much what their body composition is, their age, all these different factors. But we're aiming anywhere from 25 to 60 grams per hour after the first hour. The carbohydrates, the ultimate discussion ends up being liquids versus solids. And it's not that straightforward, and it never really is with sports nutrition. Solids versus liquids, what I want everyone to think about is, of course, the planes of movement in the body. So if someone is, for example, very static in regards to their movement, so sports like rowing as well as biking tend to be very static in their center of gravity. Therefore, solids could be a better thing. You don't have to hydrate so much. And of course, there is limited storage on a bike for what you can do for those athletes. And what you're looking at is density of energy at that point. So at that point, for cyclists, solids may be a little bit better than liquids. Liquids, for the most part, are better for anyone that's shifting their center of gravity, moving constantly. So for workouts like boot camps, as well as CrossFit, as well as giant, running or jumping or anything like that, liquids tend to be a little bit better, because, of course, that can clear through the digestive system a lot faster and fuel the muscles a lot faster. This is always to be said. More is not always better, because the majority of a lot of people have been sold the idea and the concept that more is better. This is not always the case, because in the sense of carbohydrates, the more we have, if it's not tuned well to the body, and then what it will do is elicit a digestive response during physical activity. It confuses the body, and what the body has to do at that point is decide whether or not it's going to shift the muscles, the blood to the muscles, or shift the blood to the stomach. In the best case scenario, if you have too much food during a workout, you will not have a good workout. That is the best case scenario. In the worst case scenario, you will have vomiting. You will throw up and or feel like you're throwing up, and that will cause electrolyte shifts and could increase the risk of injury. So more is not always better. It's better to find the right amount for the person that you have in front of you. And you want to get people to practice eating during exercise if that's something that they need to do. You want them to practice doing it so that they're getting used to something as opposed to just like, here, eat this during physical activity. You might want to get them to practice by getting them to eat the snack closer to the exercise as opposed to further away, just to see to test out how their body is responding to it in the first place. Some examples of this fuel could be juices, sports drinks, crackers, energy bars, candies, and raisins or bananas. And like I said before, it's very important to take consideration the center of gravity for the athlete and liquids versus solids. Fueling after exercise is probably one of the most important things that people don't do very well. The goal is to recover and provide nutrients to muscles to recover from damage caused by exercise. Now, just to specify here and to clarify, I should say, all exercise causes damage. That's the point of exercise. What we're trying to do with exercise is tear apart a little bit of lean muscle mass, cause some good stress to the lean muscle mass. And if we're properly fed afterwards, then what will happen is the lean muscle mass will repair and it will be increased in strength. So the next time someone does that physical activity, it'll hopefully be easier. The majority of people do not fuel properly after exercise, and this is for many, many different reasons. One of the biggest ones being weight loss, of course. If they feel like if they don't eat properly, if they eat less, the calories in following the calories in, calories out formula, if they eat less, then they're going to lose more. And that's not often the case. In fact, in many cases, in many times, I see a lot of clients coming into my office and I actually increase their calories and they end up losing weight. The reason why is hormonally the body will not respond to massive caloric deficits, and those massive caloric deficits will actually change the body's hormonal function to gain weight and decrease the lean muscle mass. So what we have over time is if we don't fuel properly after the workout or the physical activity, then we're actually tearing apart lean muscle mass and causing the hormonal shifts that come with tear down of lean muscle mass. So increase changes in hunger hormones. And then what's happening is that those changes in hunger hormones, if they're not being met because someone's not eating, then it will tear apart lean muscle mass to fuel the muscles. Now, there's two phases to a post-workout nutrition plan: a repair phase and a refueling phase. The repair phase is associated with protein, and the refueling phase is associated with carbohydrate. I will talk about more about that in the next slide. But right now, what you need to know is fueling after exercise can help prevent infections. So it does not improve your immunity, but it keeps it stable. It can prevent muscle or joint issues. So for example, a lot of people that have been exercising for a very, very long time, they will start to complain about things like back pain or neck pain for no reason whatsoever. A lot of times this gets dismissed as I slept weird on it, or I need a new mattress and I just haven't got it, or anything like that. But in reality, what happens if we miss either one of these phases, the repair phase or the refueling phase, the body will tear apart lean muscle mass, and to address the nutritional needs of that, or physiological needs, I should say, of that muscle. So let's say someone does a heavy, heavy leg workout and they don't eat properly, or a big, big, big run and they don't eat properly. The next day they're waking up and they're finding that their neck and their arm hurts. And they might just think, well, I didn't sleep very well. But in reality, what happened overnight, because they missed this refueling opportunity, was the body started tearing apart lean muscle mass from their neck and their arms to mobilize to the legs, as both to repair and to refuel. To repair, it's the amino acids move to the muscles. To refuel, the amino acids move to the liver to change into carbohydrate via gluconeogenesis to refuel that muscle that was active. So over time, more and more joint issues happen, more and more muscle damage occurs, and the body composition changes more and more and more to favor fat production and lean muscle mass suppression. So what we have over time is, if we use the analogy of a car engine, what we have is a V8 engine car. So each one of those muscles is a V8 engine that are improperly maintained. What we have is those pistons dying down. So we have eventually over time the 4-cylinder engine doing the work of a V8 engine. Now, this is important because the V4 engine will still work, but it'll work a lot harder than it needs to. And that's why there's increased pain with physical activity. There's increased pain day to day with day to day activities of daily living. And what ends up happening is this eventually comes into joint issues as well, because the joints aren't well supported. And of course, this is the body's reaction to not feeling properly after exercise. So it's very important to fuel properly after exercise. Right now, I'm watching the snow fall, so of course, there's not a lot of risk for heat exhaustion. But of course, during summer months, this is very, very important, especially in specific populations like children as well as adults, because their thirst response is impaired. There's also post-exercise muscle soreness, and this speaks to the day-to-day back pains and neck pains, like I was telling you about. But of course, those are multifaceted things. It's just that nutrition is often not thought about when thought about back pain. And overall, it promotes better health by promoting better body composition for better aging, as well as a better ability to do activities of daily living. There are two windows when we look at refueling after physical activity: the short protein window as well as the carbohydrate window. The carbohydrate window is much more forgiving. It's most optimized from the 45 minutes up to 2 hours. Protein, the requirement is within 0 to 20 minutes. Now, there's a lot of literature that shows over 24 hours you need to increase the protein after physical activity. But of course, I like to play this cautious. I like to be a little bit more cautious and conservative in this regard and just address the 20-minute window right away. Now, to give you an idea of how much protein is required, it's anywhere from 20 to 30 grams. When we don't hit the 20 to 30 gram mark, what happens is the body will increase cortisol production. So cortisol being a stress hormone, and the stress hormone cortisol has different activities during the day as well as at nighttime. So during the day, cortisol will increase cortisol production, tends to tear apart lean muscle mass and promote fat gain. At nighttime, it tends to do something slightly different. Now, cortisol during the nighttime tends to tear apart lean fatty mass and preserve lean muscle mass a little bit better. That does not mean we should work out at nighttime, because hormonally the body is primed to build muscle and burn fat a little bit more effectively during the day. So of course, the circadian rhythms have to be taken into consideration when the workout is being done. But of course, if we reduce the cortisol production, then we're reducing stress hormones, and we're preserving lean muscle mass and building on top of that. And with the protein, we have a 0 to 20-minute window after the physical activity, up to 45 minutes. Now, carbohydrates, like I said, is 45 minutes up to 2 hours. And the amount of carbohydrate depends on the type of workout and the intensity, as well as the heart rate and the exerciser. With protein, it's a little bit more straightforward. It's about 20 to 30 grams. So that's roughly one chicken breast after physical activity. So suggestions for post-workout recovery foods, if someone is able to eat them: half a turkey sandwich, 500 milliliters of a skim milk, because we're looking at decreasing the fat intake to prevent the body from to allow the body to digest the proteins a little bit easier without having the fat slow down that digestion. And of course, a smoothie with protein powder is always an option, and a good option as well, depending on the type of person you have in front of you. Most of the time, and this is where a liquid versus solid discussion comes into place. And of course, for lower intensive physical activity, solids may be a little bit better tolerated, especially if someone is not looking to increase too much supplementation in their diet, or we're following purely a food first approach. Then we're looking to match solid foods with lower intensity workouts. With higher intensity workouts, we're looking at liquid nutrition, because it addresses multiple things, such as hydration as well as nutritional needs. And the smoothie with protein powder and milk, skim milk, end up being a very, very good choice for that. Now, replacing sweat losses. This is a very, very complicated topic. In fact, there's mountains and mountains of literature talking about hydration and what affects hydration. But what we do know is that 2 to 3% of body mass lost through sweat can severely, severely impair performance. Anywhere from 5+% can actually cause physical death. So it's extremely dangerous, because a lot of people will say, go work out in the heat because you do burn more calories. And while that is true, we have to be very aware of hydration status. For hydration, the human body can lose anywhere from 500 milliliters of 8 liters of fluid from sweat per hour. Now, there's a lot of variables at play here. Of course, some of the variables include age, biological sex, equipment used, and athletic status, as well as the body composition. For athletes, well-trained athletes, they typically start sweating earlier and will sweat much, much more than the untrained athlete. So what we're looking at here is, of course, we're elite athletes will actually lose much, much more sweat from physical activity than your untrained athletes. So that's important to keep in mind. And of course, like I said, equipment comes into play. So every year in the States, there's always about anywhere from 2 to 6 kids that die in the States because, especially in the southern states, especially for football. If we look at football, the equipment used, it doesn't allow the body to sweat efficiently. So when the body doesn't sweat efficiently to cool down the body, then what the body does is it sweats more, losing more and more sweat. And of course, with kids, it's very, very easy to lose quite a bit of body mass through physical activity, especially in those hot, humid environments where the body tends to sweat much, much more. And that's the ultimate confusion that comes with sweat rates. Just because someone's sweating, there's other variables that can change everything. So 1 or 2 degrees Celsius higher could change the amount of sweat that you're having. The humidex could change the amount of sweat you're having. The type of clothing you're wearing can change everything quite a bit. So there's quite a bit to so 500 milliliters to 8 liters of fluid from sweat is a very, very complicated thing, and it's a lot of fluids to lose. There's a fine balance between drinking enough and too much. Because, of course, for those of you that have drank too much during physical activity, you'll notice your stomach feels a bit like a aquarium is just sloshing around liquids. Now, this depends on many, many different things like sweat rates, as well as tolerance to hydration during physical activity or right before. And the most important thing is intense exercise may impair thirst and hunger responses, actually. So it's quite a difficult thing to look at hydration. It's not as simple as just drinking water because there's many, many other factors that come into place. The most at-risk groups are elite athletes, children, and the elderly. Now, for the children and the elderly, or what we call masters athletes, is they have impaired sweat responses or thirst responses. And for the elderly, impaired sweat responses. So these are very, very dangerous groups. And for elite athletes, like I said, intense physical activity may impair the thirst response. And of course, elite athletes are being trained in multiple conditions at multiple times to create a better athlete. So, for example, a coach might get an athlete to run outside in the heat to create better adaptive cellular adaptation by stimulating some cellular responses with the heat shock proteins as well as the training. So there's many reasons why coaches do the things that they do, and that it affects nutrition drastically. So be aware of the elite athletes, the children, and the elderly. In order to address hydration for the everyday person, I should say, is it's not as difficult. Water will suffice. But the best way to check is to check their urine color in the morning to see if they're hydrated or not. If they're well hydrated already, then they are going to be fine during the physical activity. So typically, dark and scanty urine versus pale yellow urine. Of course, pale yellow represents well hydrated. Dark and scanty is dehydrated. So the easiest thing, and this is a quote from The Simpsons, but Ned Flanders, when he says, if it's thick and yellow, you got, if it's if it's clear and yellow, you've got juice there, fella. If it's dark and brown, you're in cider town. So I ask my athletes all the time, did you pee out apple cider this morning or apple juice? And when they say apple juice, I'm like, okay, go. You're ready to go. If they pee out apple cider, they need to drink a ton of fluids before they can train. Because if they're well hydrated before the training session, the likelihood that they're going to be dehydrated during the session is a lot lower. So make sure to look at those metrics for the everyday athlete. We also want to be able to remind them that dehydration causes fatigue, headaches, and of course, lethargy during the workout. So we want to be sure that if someone's constantly saying, I'm feeling tired during this workout, or I'm getting headaches when I work out here, what is going on? Because those symptoms could be indicative of dehydration and fluid shifts and electrolyte imbalances. It's important to also say that with hydration, a lot of people tend to actually overhydrate. I find that to be a bigger problem than underhydration nowadays, because everyone is very, very good at drinking water, or most people are. They're typically gauging their fluids by the color of their urine, and they're typically aiming for very clear color urine. This is an indication that they're actually overhydrated and that their electrolytes are diluted quite a bit. So we want to be aware of this. We also want to be aware of the biological sex differences in how we pee. Men have a very easy time telling what color their urine is because they can physically see it. For women, they typically pee and then get up and then look into the bowl to gauge. Now, we have to take into account this consideration that the amount that you pee into the bowl gets diluted with the water in the bowl too. So it's very, very often difficult to gauge hydration status with women by looking at urine color, unless you look at those metrics and you tell them that it's often going to be a few shades darker in yellow. So if it's light in yellow, it's most likely that when you have a female there athlete, then they are a little bit dehydrated. They need to drink a little bit more. We remind athletes to pay attention to the thirst cues if it's appropriate. And of course, we remind them that they can range anywhere from 500 mils to 8 liters, depending on the intensity, heat, the age, and the equipment. Now, there's a lot going on here with with sports nutrition, and I covered the best of my ability. But of course, there's way more in the world of sports nutrition that needs to be talked about. And so, as such, what I've done is created the ESN Sports Nutrition certificate course. And when I created this, quickly realized there's actually 3 different levels. So the level 1 is the level 1 certificate is geared towards understanding the basics of sports nutrition on a deeper level. For those of you that are trying to break into different patient populations or different client populations in your private practice to support them with their physical activity and their nutrition. So what we talk about is exercise physiology and metabolism, energy needs in the athlete, macronutrient needs in the athlete, hydration and micronutrients to a bigger degree, more of the basics of sports nutrition for the everyday athlete, and meal planning for those athletes. Of course, this is for the everyday population that is a little bit more athletic and a little bit more serious about it. So with people with regular gym schedules, that is, of course, what that level 1 certificate is meant to be for. The level 2 certificate is meant to be around more intense athletes. Of course, we're talking about counseling strategies for the athlete, because there's quite a few differences counseling in the athletic population than the general population. We're also looking at bone health in the athlete, something that doesn't get addressed quite enough. Disordered eating in the athletes. And of course, this is something we see quite a bit because there's a lot of false food beliefs out there. And what we want to do is minimize the risk of eating disorders and disordered eating in the athletes, because there's a fine line between a motivated athlete that's trying to fuel their exercise better and a athlete with an eating disorder, with justifying their eating behaviors with their sport. So we go into that as well for that module. Nutritional strategies on game day. So, of course, game day nutrition or race day nutrition is very, very different than training nutrition. So we'll take a look at how those things work. The introduction of sports supplements, so covering the most common sports supplements and how they work in the body and which ones are beneficial, which ones are not, and how to pick ones that are a little bit more, that are much, much more compliant with the International Olympic Committee and the World Anti-Doping Drug Administration Committee body, and weight loss and body composition for the athlete. So, of course, if athletes are looking to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time, that is very, very possible, and that's what that module is all about. Level 3 is for more of the advanced athlete, someone with a very, very big training plan. Of course, we look at seasonal athletes like soccer players and everything like that, where they have off seasons and everything like that. And what we're looking at for periodization for nutrition. We're looking at recovery metrics a lot more with that population because their training intensity is much, much higher, and their training loads and times are much, much higher. With level 3, we're also looking at sports nutrition for children and young athletes. And the reason why is because the majority of athletes are young children. And it's there where they build the most important nutrition education, and getting proper nutrition to support puberty, human growth, as well as sport is a very, very complicated thing. Then we talk about the special category of the aging athlete, which is, of course, going to be much, much higher in population with the baby boomers in a little bit, with the disposable income that they have. So we want to be able to support that population to be able to help them build lean muscle mass as much as possible and address factors that are unique to the older population, like bone mineral density, and how do we do that safely with nutrition and their training. We look at nutrition for the traveling athlete, how different time zones and different elevations affect them. We also look at injury and concussion treatment and prevention for the athletic population. That's a very, very big topic. And we look at tournament based nutrition. So, athletes in tournament based settings, how they should pack their food, their nutrition, and how you can create customized plans for that. Each level certificate has case studies, quizzes, certificates, supplemental readings, notes, and questions answered as a part of the certificate course. And of course, I will be running these courses, and we have different times. So Level 1 is launched March 13th, so about a month from today, and we have a pre-sale code for 50% off for everyone watching today. That's ESN LCSNC1. So you get $50 off with that certificate, and it's going into the metrics that we talked about before. And the pre-sale starts tomorrow, or actually today once I fix the website, and it goes all the way until March 13th when the course actually starts. So that's the pre-sale code there. Level 2 is going to start June 12th, 2019, and level 3 is going to be September 18th, 2019. Now you can pick each and every one of these based on what you want to do and your athletic populations and how you want to grow your business and all that kind of stuff. But I will be having a very, very comprehensive for those of you that are interested in building out building on top of each one, because the course is designed to be level 1, level 2, level 3, and graduate up. And the discount code for that is going to be ESN LCSNC for $200, and that code is going to be live all throughout the month of March in recognition for Nutrition Month, as well as to support nutrition professionals like yourself. So I want to thank you all for paying attention and tuning into this webinar today and entertaining those last few slides. I'm just going to share a couple of references with you, and this final slide where you can see my Instagram, contact information, as well as websites where you can find a lot more information on the certificate course that will be live later today. I'll update the website a little bit later today. And of course, my TV show, which is live across Canada right now on Bell. And but I'm also uploading the episodes each week on our YouTube channel. And like I said, in March, I will have a little bit of a different media announcement. So stay tuned for that. We're always looking for different ways at Evolve Sport and Nutrition to help bring nutrition to the masses, make nutrition a little bit more democratic, a little bit more accessible to everyone. And of course, we're going to have a few initiatives this year, along with a lot of development with the ESN Learning Center now that I have a VP in charge of that. And of course, I'm always available through Facebook, as well as email. I'm not going to leave my email up here, but you can always message me on Facebook. My name is Ben Sit, and what I'm going to do right now is sign off here, share my webcam with everyone, stop sharing my screen sharing, and go back into the live web chat to see if we can do so much more. So if anyone has any questions right now on the live stream, I'd love to be able to answer them for you. And if not, then I'll just hang around for the next little bit. So not a lot of activity on the chat right now. Maybe suspecting that the recorded aspect of this webinar is going to be what everyone's looking forward to watching later on, I should say. So no fault of that. But of course, I can always be reached through my email as well as through Facebook to answer any and all questions. And you can all find me on the Evolve Sport and Nutrition website, as well as the Highway to Health TV website. More than happy to answer questions there and see what we can do for you. But of course, a lot of those questions may be answered in the Sport and Nutrition certificate. So again, thank you all for watching. And if there are no questions in the chat room right now, then I'm going to sign off. All right. Well, it looks like there's not a lot of activity in the chat room right now. So I will sign off and say drive safe to everyone in the GTA area right now being hit by the snowstorm. Very lucky that I'm able to work from home and record from home and do all these kind of things. But like I said, I want to thank you all for. Oh, I have a question here from Tamara. She asks, how long would it take to complete all 3 levels of the certificate? Now, what this certificate is meant to be is each certificate is going to be live for about 9. Every purchase is going to have about a 90-day access, and that is all the information is going to be available at once, because I've learned quite a bit from the keto course that I created. There was feedback about having the modules roll out one by one per week and not having access to the full 90 days. And I think that is quite fair and valid feedback. So what I'm going to be able to do is create 90 days access for all the modules available at one time. So you can YouTube binge that, or I guess Netflix style binge the content, and do all the information at your own schedule. So if you, for example, have 1 or 2 weeks off and want to get through that whole thing by yourself, then of course you can do that. So you have 90 days access. I would imagine anywhere between the 90-day time, and I hope that answers your question. Personally, each module is roughly about 1 hour long, an hour to about 60 to about 75 minutes long. And of course, there are going to be supplemental readings that go with that. But of course, everyone consumes things at or processes things through different rates, different speeds. So that I hope that answers a little bit more of your questions there, Tamara. But the courses, because there goes a lot. There's a lot to go into building a course, and building those courses are very, very tricky and difficult, and making sure we cover all the angles from the right way. Making sure the quizzes are good and updating regularly, as well as me chiming in and answering any questions that go on in the chats associated with each and every module. So that's hopefully we can answer that question a little bit more. But the moment you get to pass that, you get to do the quizzes and you pass a certain grade with the course, then what I do is I issue out a certificate of completion. And that is really, really good, because for a lot of health professionals, it does help, because a lot of, workplaces cover continuing education with completion certificates. So that's something that we'll be able to do. And of course, that if that's something that your population is looking for, then if you're looking for, I should say, it's a good way to build your practice. So Nazreen, thank you so much behind that. What is the theory behind fat loss in working out? That's quite a complicated and loaded topic there. But the theory is to basically better be able to utilize the current athletic status in that. So using, taking a look at the mitochondrial buildup in the muscles, better utilizing that in energy pathways and controlling your heart rates during workouts, and what kind of workouts are best for fat loss and which workouts are best for muscle gain. And this is all addressed in the course. So the theory there is to preserve lean muscle mass during the workout and burn fat only as the fuel source. And of course, this can be done. So the theory there is to basically feed someone the right way to activate the right energy pathways to make sure that they're burning fat properly during that fuel source, during that workout. Nazreen also has another question of, I mentioned gluconeogenesis when not eating, but when does the body take from fat stores while preserving lean muscle mass? And of course, this is dependent on the type of physical activity available, what the person's doing, the rep ranges, and all that. And of course, I go into that in the course. And it's basically feeding someone properly before the workout, as well as feeding someone properly after the workout, and all the other recovery mechanisms that go into place. So sleep measures, sleep metrics, stress management, all that kind of stuff. That's how we optimize fat burn during the workouts. Any recommendations for types of exercise that can do this to specifically burn fat and preserve lean muscle mass. It's not specifically the type of exercise. Well, I guess it is the type of exercises that matters. So to be perfectly clear, any exercise can burn fat and preserve lean muscle mass or build lean muscle mass. It's dependent on the way someone is fed, and that's what I hope to achieve with that course that I put together. The types of exercises someone can do, I guess, in a most general statement, is very low intensity physical activity. So something like the elliptical machine ends up being very, very good for fat burn and muscle maintenance, because what the elliptical machine does is it physiologically reduces your ability to go at a higher intensity. For example, it's much, much easier to run 5 kilometers on a treadmill than it is to run 5 kilometers on an elliptical machine. So an elliptical machine at lower intensities ends up being much, much better for fat burn and muscle maintenance. But of course, the nutrition aspect of that is going to be much more complicated. And unfortunately, I don't have enough time to do that, because I do have clients in about 10 minutes or so, starting in 10 minutes at 1:10. I hope that answers your question there, Nazreen. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, I hope that answers all the questions that you have. I want to thank everyone that tuned in live for watching. And of course, anyone that's interested in learning more about sports nutrition. What we can do is you can take a look at the website. That's www.evolvesportnutrition.com. There will be more information on the certificate course, all 3 levels, updated later today. And for those of you watching the replay, I hope you found this useful. And what I will do is advertise next time that there's going to be a Q&A session after the webinar is finished. So thank you so much for tuning in again. And for those of you that watched, I will send you a playback link on the email list, and so we'll make this readily accessible for everyone, so that we can continue to update and expand our information and our skill set as dietitians and nutrition professionals, so that we're better equipped to deal with the complexities of the general population. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye.